Well, so once again, Hasbro's in-house creative wish list team, is offering something really giant. And for the first time, they're doing it in the Star Wars Black Series, their 6-inch line, as opposed to 3 3/4. And if you haven't been living under a rock or in a Rancor cave, you know that that item is the Black Series Rancor, meant to be in scale with other 6-inch figures. And ever since the add-on tier stretch goal items have been revealed, there has been a lot of what's a good word for like anger and disappointment from rancor. There's been a lot of rancor from the fans, especially seeing things like figures that they already own just being recarded. In fact, there's been a whole movement in the fan base called "No Oola, No Moolah," meaning if Oola, the 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 character from Return of the Jedi that's eaten by the Rancor, the Jabba's dancer, isn't included, then people aren't going to buy the Rancor. Now, this 6-inch Rancor has been in development for a long time, as obvious or as evident, more so, from the 2019 San Diego Comic-Con display and fan panel, where Hasbro spent about 20 minutes of their fan panel talking about this Rancor that at that time was just part of a display. Well, in my opinion, as a from doing this for many many years as a toy maker, this was probably because they didn't think it was going to move forward, and this was their one chance to show off all the work that went into it. So that's kind of exactly what this video is all about, is presenting a little bit of a different opinion. There's been a lot of talk online about the Rancor, whether it's going to move forward, whether Hasbro did the right thing with the different tier offerings, and whether or not Oola comes with the Rancor, which she's obviously not coming with the Rancor. I want to sort of address a different perspective on the project, on the funding, and well, a big part of that is because I've worked professionally in the toy industry for many, many years, and I've worked on Star Wars toys. I haven't worked at Hasbro, and I have not worked on 3 3/4 Star Wars, but I do have experience on the brand, and I do have experience working with Lucasfilm and Disney, and well, bringing Star Wars toys to market. So let's talk a little bit about, kind of fandom. I'm obviously not just a toy maker, but I'm also a big fan of Star Wars toys. And, well, toys in general, but Star Wars toys is kind of my number one. Yes, I love He-Man. Yes, I love Marvel and DC and Transformers and Voltron and Rick and Morty and 1,000 other things. But I've been collecting Star Wars figures my whole life, especially the modern line that started in 1995, and my office is pretty much decorated with them all over the place. They're within reach, they're on every shelf, and I even have a whole back room filled with different tool bins, with each one has an individual figure in it, labeled with their accessory, because yes, that's what I do with my figures. I don't have room to display 2,000 Star Wars figures or whatever it is. Hey, I've even done a series on this channel going wave by wave, examining every wave in the modern line starting in 1995. So if you haven't seen that series, do check it out because it's quite informative, I've been told. All right, so going back to the Rancor and the feelings that fans have about it, which I'll avoid using that pun again about the Rancor. Oh, I did it anyway. All right, so the tier add-ons are things that fans more or less already have. They've just been represented in a different package, which is an inexpensive option for a toy company, of course. And something like the Gamorrean Guard, fans already have Gamorrean Guards, plural, and that's probably because they were Target exclusives, easy to get, and heck, they even went on clearance. So yeah, it makes it all that much easier to justify getting multiple pig guards. And when you compare the Rancor with something like the Sail Barge, a previous Star Wars Haslab offering, the Sail Barge had a lot of pent-up demand, much like the Ecto Pack in Ghostbusters. And there were add-ons. There were also tiers. Well, there was only one tier add-on, which was Yak Face, offered on a vintage card with a coin, exactly like the Gamorrean Guards are doing. It's a package execution for a figure that was already tooled. The thing with the Sail Barge is because of that pent-up demand for years and years and years, Hasbro was able to harness this fan excitement, and fans, they really pushed to make this happen. It was the first time that a large item was offered, the first HasLab item, and the aftermarket was huge, and that was part of what convinced Hasbro to keep doing things. So obviously they've done HasLab items for multiple brands. They've done Marvel, they've done Transformers, they've done Magic the Gathering, and there have been items with more tooling with the add-on tiers, and that's kind of the crux of, I think, a lot of fans' argument at this time, that the add-on items for the Rancor weren't enough. Like with the Sentinel, you got, figures and extra heads, and same thing with Galactus. You got extra heads, you got different mouthpieces, and even one of the final tier add-on figure, Morg, is not a fully tooled figure, but he's got a lot of tooling on him, and that I think has shined as an example that why aren't we getting our fully tooled Oola figure with the Rancor if you can do that with Galactus? So there's obviously business rationale for this, but there's also brand history. So one aspect is that Oola was never promised, and us being angry that she's not included, well, again, no one said she would be, so we've created our own expectations, and when those expectations weren't met, and from a logistics standpoint, from a business standpoint, Oola's going to be a fully tooled figure, and she's going to cost about $100,000 to make. And Hasbro is always going to look to the stockholders first, because these are people who have put up money and invested in the company. Any publicly traded company is going to do this. But let's look specifically at the history of the Star Wars brand, because this is what's different. It's, like Passover. Why is this night different from all other nights? Why is Star Wars, and specifically scale in Star Wars and long-term collecting, different from really any other brand? So going back to 1978 when Star Wars toys first hit, because they weren't ready for the movie, because nobody believed in movie-related merchandise back then. Hey, if Planet of the Apes and Barbarella was all you were getting, you would understand why people had a hard time. So Kenner, getting the license, changed everything with an amazing line that really shaped a lot of our childhoods, myself included. And the figures, the 3 3/4 figures, really became the main collectible, the main item that we all wanted to get, right? Collect all 92 or 96 or 120, depending on how you do the math. So these became very, very beloved to a lot of us. So much so that the Retro series offered in 2019, 20, and 21 offers reproductions of the toys we had as kids, and we're willing to pay $10 a piece just to have those reproductions. But going back again to the history of the brand, the figures were not the original centerpiece. The original centerpiece was the Millennium Falcon and the other ships. Kenner and Lucasfilm at the time also agreed that what parents were going to want to buy for their kids were the ships. They were the stars of the movie. The characters were ancillary, kind of like how the dinosaurs were the stars of Jurassic Park, not the humans. And the figures were really seen as accessories to the vehicles, kind of like how Ken is an accessory to Barbie. You need them in order to pilot the ship, but they're not 100% necessary. You could just get the ship. But that thrill of putting them in the cockpit, that was how kids emotionally connected to the toys, because now you were flying the ship. You were Han Solo or Chewbacca or Greedo, whoever happens to be in the cockpit at the time. So while the original intent with the toys was the ships being the main driver, if you will, sales driver for the line, it didn't last. And very quickly, it turned out that kids were wanting to buy the figures, especially because they were relatively inexpensive, and the idea of collecting them all and having an entire universe of Star Wars, yes, that could interact with the ships, but the figures worked on their own. And let's face it, Star Wars is a very, very big galaxy. It's only gotten bigger as time has gone on and more content has been developed. Everything from Caravan of Courage to Rise of Skywalker has added worlds, characters, and, it's a giant world filled with drug smugglers and things like, droids that are built to torture other droids. Droids can feel pain? That's got to be like a whole other YouTube video. Like, droids feeling pain? Anyway, torture droids. Crazy concept. We'll get into that in some other video someday. The point is, there's a lot going on in Star Wars, and that is why 3 3/4, when it transitioned into the modern line in 95, has worked so well, because it allows the collector or the child to get the entire universe. Something that's not really possible at a different scale, simply because of shelf space, simply because of how much room you can store and display these figures. I mean, that room I showed you where all my figures were kept, or, this shelf of figures on display, can only be possible because of the 3 3/4 scale. The Black Series was originally introduced as just a sort of new flavor of the month way of collecting Star Wars. In fact, several new flavors had been done over the years. Everything from the Unleashed line, to the 8-inch figures on the rotating bases that came out in '97. There's been a lot of attempts to sort of throw spaghetti against the wall and see what sticks. And the thing is with the Black Series, while it was intended to be a flavor of the month and just something new, something unexpected happened. Was the cost of toys continued to rise, the cost of production, the cost of labor, and the price value for the consumer really altered the perception of the Black Series versus the 3 3/4 Vintage Series line, or just the standard 3 3/4 line that with limited articulation. And consumers, parents and kids being the big part of it, really saw, well, for a price difference of, say, $6, you went from a 3 3/4 to a 6-inch. And this kind of became a hard pill to swallow for longtime collectors who were already sold into the 3 3/4 world and had been collecting it for decades. Hasbro did try to create a galaxy for 6-inch. They've tried this several times by adding bigger items and more world-building items besides figures. Things like beasts, things like Jabba, things like this TIE Fighter, which was sold at mass retail, which meant it was aimed at both children and the adult collector who would also, pick up the slack, that last 20% of sales. Well, this item didn't do well. I mean, yeah, collectors were excited to get a giant TIE Fighter, and part of it might have been the fact that it was tied into Episode 7, but giant items in the Black Series, or rather, vehicles in the Black Series, have to be really big. The Black Series is hard enough to display and show off as is, because they're, so large, that you need a lot more shelf space versus 3 3/4. And Star Wars is a very, very big galaxy with a lot of characters, probably more than almost any IP. I mean, Marvel's got a lot of characters, and DC, obviously, but Star Wars has probably put out more individual characters. With the TIE Fighter not doing too well, other attempts have been made. Hasbro has offered things like the Snowspeeder, which was a smaller vehicle, but again, didn't do that well. Even the Dewback, which even smaller still, or the Land Speeder that was offered, or Rey's, upside down, backwards Land Speeder. Just the Land Speeder on its side, if you really look at it. Anyway, none of those really did well. So that brings us back to the Rancor and the add-on items, and why it's having a difficult time, or at least my theory. So, because so many of us are highly invested in the 3 3/4 world for the advantages it offers a collector, that being really display space and the fact that you can own the entire Star Wars universe at this scale, something that is just really not possible at 6-inch because of the cost of larger items from a wallet perspective and a display perspective. Sure, they could have done, Malakili, the Rancor Keeper, as a 6-inch figure and thrown down $100,000 on tooling. But would this have really made a difference? I think, and here's, my sort of opinion based on experience, is that with these Haslab items, same thing with what Mattel's done with Matty Collector, Mattel Creations, you're either in or you're out pretty much from the beginning. And yeah, there's some arm twisting and there's some, tier revealing, but really, you're either you're like the item or you don't. The 6-inch line is really about more detailed figures in a scale that gives really good price value, because for $20 or $22, whatever they are at now, plus it gives you the ability to have your figures interact with other characters in pop culture. They really don't have, lots of characters in 3 3/4. I mean, I know there's a new Marvel sort of retro line like that, and there was the Marvel Universe line, but the point being is that if you want your Star Wars characters to interact with characters from others' IP or face off against them in battle, 6-inch works really well. That's one of the big advantages of 6-inch, because so many brands are available in 6-inch, limited brands at 3 3/4. So the Rancor being an item that is connected to a scale that is not really positioned to have an entire universe at, that's kind of, that right there, to me, I think is the crux of the argument. And I've done pre-sale items that, need to meet certain levels in the past. Professionally, I've sold these items. And I can tell you from my direct experience, if you have more or less 50% funded before you enter the last day, the item's going to move forward. It's almost like sort of a rule. I mean, obviously not written in stone, but I have found this, that you get 50% up to the final day, and then that last 50%. Or, I mean, of course, there are items that surpass us quickly, like the Ghostbuster Proton Pack. At the end of the day, anything could happen. But I think that the reason that there's fewer people interested in the Rancor is directly tied to the fact that it's harder to display a huge universe at 6-inch. And if it doesn't move forward, it's not going to affect Hasbro. There's all these posts online saying, oh, Hasbro's going to fall apart, and the Hasbro, it's the end of the Star Wars line and the end of the Star Wars brand team. And yeah, no, Hasbro has a huge portfolio. Star Wars is one of many, many brands they have, and action figures and this Rancor is one item within Star Wars, within a much larger portfolio of brands. So we're not looking at the end of Hasbro here.
Not over yet.
So what do you think? Could anything happen? Is it over? Is it just beginning? Are you getting the Rancor? Are you not? And why? Let me know in the comments below. Share this video if you can. It always helps with the algorithm and telling YouTube to keep sharing it with other people. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you guys next time.